Welcome back. My name is Chris, and in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the period close procedure for NetSuite. And this is going to serve as an overview guiding video on this procedure, not going into excruciating detail on any one particular tool or feature. I have other YouTube videos where I go into much greater detail on specific topics. So really just going to go at subject by subject, tool by tool. And for each particular topic, I am going to show you not just how you can do the period close procedure in NetSuite, but also how you can utilize a third-party app called NetClose, which is the only third-party app that is actually embedded into NetSuite that provides and really dramatically augments the period close capabilities in NetSuite. So with all that in mind, let's take a look at this in the system. All right, here we are on our NetSuite dashboard. And when you're talking about the period close procedure, it all revolves around the period close checklist and the tasks that are included in it. So let's take a look at how you would approach that. You would come up here to setup, you come down here to accounting, and then we have down here the manage accounting periods. So we're gonna open that up in a separate tab. And you're probably already familiar with this, but if not, let me give you a basic orientation. The concept here is that we've gotten to the end of a particular month, and we now wanna close out the month that's just ended and do any additional tasks from an accounting standpoint that need to be done to make sure that is fully closed off and we can move into the next period, the one that we're now currently in. So what you do is you come here to manage accounting periods. You can see we have every fiscal year, and for each particular fiscal year, we're going to have all the periods, aka months, listed out here month by month. Now in this particular case, it just defaulted to come into 2024. So let's open up. Let's say the current month was January 2024, or at least that's the month we're going to be closing off. This is where we would come in and we'd say, all right, we want to take a look at the checklist for that period. And you can see that icon right here. So let's click on that. It brings us into January 2024. Now it does give us a warning message at the top that apparently there were previous periods that are still open. You need to close them in order, always moving up closer to the present time. But in this particular case, we're going to ignore it because I'm not actually going to go through the checklist fully. I'm just going to orient you to what we're dealing with here. So what we can see here is every line here is its own task for this checklist. So you can see, you go through, the first things that we're doing is we're locking off specific general ledger accounts. So you can lock off all of accounts receivable, all of accounts payable, and then simply all accounts overall. Then you go through things like handling any period mismatches. You can review any negative inventory that exists in the system. Coming down here, you can generate intercompany cross charges, revalue open foreign currencies, et cetera, et cetera. Every one of these checklist items, when you go into it, it's going to give you a little button and basically click on that. Like if we're dealing with generate intercompany cross charges, that button would take you to the tool in NetSuite that allow you to generate those cross charges. So you'd go do that function. You then come back to the checklist step, and all you're really doing here is you're checking these things off. Whether you actually do them in the system or not, it's not going to demand anything from you. It's really just going to ask that you come in here and you say, yep, that one's done, and it's going to force you to go down this checklist in a particular order. Now, this checklist, as you've probably kind of figured out by now, it is quite rigid, and more importantly, it's non-customizable. So the problem with that is, for any real business, if they're doing their month-end close procedure, they're going to have certain things that are particular to them. They're going to have certain elements that are simply not going to be included in this checklist. And they're going to find certain things on this checklist that they just don't do in real life, such as review custom GL plugin executions. Plenty of businesses will have no requirement to do that, to actually close out their books for that period. So what you're dealing with here is you just have to go through these things. You can't take off checklist items, or I should say tasks. You can't put in new ones that you actually do. You can't customize them, reorder them. None of those capabilities. You're stuck with this checklist as is, and you're stuck with these exact general ledger locking procedures. It's just the way it is. You go through and you have to do this checklist in NetSuite to be able to close off a period, which is an integral part of handling your accounting for any particular company. So that is how tasks work from what I would call a standard or a native NetSuite perspective. Let's now take a look at how you can deal with tasks if you are utilizing the NetClose product. So let's come over here to NetClose. We're going to come down here to tasks, and let's open up this task list. So opening this up, we get our first feel for how the NetClose product looks and operates. You can see we've got a lot of filters up on top in relation to our tasks. And then down below, we're gonna have the tasks themselves. So in this particular case, it's already filtered for the current period, but I actually wanna go back a few periods because this is one that I'm more familiar with, is the August 2025 period. And what we're dealing with here, we now have this long listing populated where we've got all of these different tasks just for August 2025, that one period. And the whole point here is not that you can create an enormous amount of tasks. You certainly can if you want to, but really what you've got here is all of the additional detail and functionality that's being added in here, things that you cannot get with the native NetSuite. So things like, first off, just being able to create whatever tasks you want, being able to come in here and assign who is going to be handling that task. Also on this right column here, you can assign the reviewers, in other words, the people that are going to look at the task as it was done, ensure that it was done appropriately and sign off on it. You can assign things like due dates. In other words, how soon does this person need to get it done? And let's actually open up a particular task here. Let's got this lock accounting periods. If we click on that, it opens up the task itself. And just talking in broad strokes, we can do additional things like, as you can see down here under comment, we have a comment from Braden Miller to Paige basically saying, hey, I need some information or I need you to do something for this particular task. It's as easy as coming in here saying, this particular person, you'll have these employees added into the system. I want to send an email to this person so I can get additional info, or I need them to assist me in some way for my completion of this task. It can all be listed right here. Moving on from that, we have capabilities like dependencies, where you can specify that this particular task is reliant on other tasks being either started, completed, etc. We can come over on the right here and get a full audit history of this task. So especially for companies that are going to have auditors going through and ensuring that everything is done appropriately, this gives you a blow-by-blow detailed description of exactly what's happened with this task. And of course, if you are going to be having an audit procedure and you want to make sure that everything is verifiable and there's evidence to back up that this task was appropriately completed, you can come up here under documents and drop in any relevant evidence, receipts, etc. for this particular task. So closing this, we've got all these tasks, and the way this is done in the system is you're not going to be generating every single period newly these tasks. You create them as templates, and then you utilize those templates to automatically generate for every subsequent period the exact task that you want. Now, on the subject of locking accounting periods and what we saw on this original checklist where we can lock accounts receivable, payable, all, NetClose also comes with the capabilities to get much more detailed with your locking procedure. So let's come over here to NetClose. We're going to come down here to close management, and we have lock transactions. Now, this is actually something that you can do only with NetClose, like I mentioned earlier, because it's embedded into NetSuite. You have the capability to influence the settings and configurations for the system itself. Other products, things that are external, you could say integrations that really get bolted onto NetSuite, they do not have the capability to do what I'm about to show you right here, which is that instead of just locking all of accounts receivable, all of accounts payable, you can come in here and you can specify any one of these elements from a locking perspective. So maybe you want to come in here to transaction type and lock off so no bills are going to be impacting the system. Or a common usage is coming in here to users and specifying that you want to lock it for all users except for yourself, because you're the accountant that's going to be handling the last few things, journal entries, etc., needed to close out the books. So you want to make sure that you can still go in, but you don't want anyone else touching the system. This is the level of granularity that you can get involved in when dealing with NetClose's locking procedures. You can even add tiered locking, where you not only specify one particular metric, like in this case users, but you can specify multiple in conjunction. So you could say that for one particular subsidiary in one particular department, these users are going to be locked out. Or specific integrations that are hooked into your system, CSV imports. All of these things can be really fine-tuned from a locking perspective. Moving on to the next topic, let's talk about reconciliations. So let's close these windows here. And coming back here, so reconciliations, there's actually a couple different things you can do with reconciliations in general, but when you're dealing with NetSuite specifically, most people think bank reconciliations. So let's take a look at where you would address bank reconciliations. You'd come up here to transactions, down to bank, and right here we have match bank data. This is the primary tool that exists in NetSuite to go about with a bank reconciliation. And I'm not going to open up this tool just because it's actually, it can get pretty elaborate when you're dealing with bank recs. And frankly, I have an entire YouTube video just on that subject. So if you want to dive into that particular aspect, you absolutely can. I have that video. I also have a full accounting course where I talk even more about bank reconciliations. And when we talk about it from a NetGain standpoint, which is the company that makes NetClose, they actually have an additional product specifically for bank reconciliations, which is called NetCash. So if you have more in-depth requirements, you can absolutely check out NetCash. And no doubt in the coming months, I'll come out with a full tutorial on that one specific product. So that's really all I'm going to say for now on bank reconciliations. But what about just reconciliations in general? So bank reconciliations, you're going through transaction by transaction and matching up your bank account with the information that you have in your system. But what if you just want to look through specific general ledger accounts, more commonly with balance sheet accounts, and verifying that those balances are in fact correct and something is not missing, erroneously added, etc. Well, that entire procedure is simply omitted in native NetSuite. You cannot do it. You have to rely on, let's say, external Excel grids, things like that, to actually do a reconciliation. But if you are utilizing NetClose, you have an entire tool set available to you. So we're going to come up here to NetClose, down to reconciliations, and let's open up this all reconciliations tab. So coming to this is where we can come in, and I'm going to change the filter again to be for August. It gives us a full listing of all the reconciliations in this particular case that I may want to do. So I've got accounts payable. Basically, these are all either one or more accounts. So accounts payable, accrued marketing, accrued wages, etc. And for each one of these balance sheet accounts that we have listed here, we can take a look, if I draw this over, we can take a look at the ending balance for that account, and we can see how much of it is, you could say, verified or explained, and how much of it is left unexplained. In an ideal world, we're able to get this unexplained balance fully down to zero for all elements. So everything, for every one of these particular accounts that we're trying to reconcile, we can explain their balances fully. Nothing is left undone. And in instances where there is a remaining amount, that's something where we want to go in and find out what's happening there. Was there a particular entry that wasn't run, or maybe an error, an extra bill that was added that shouldn't have been? Something has caused a problem here that should not exist, and we want to go in and explain what's happening with that and resolve a problem if it is required. And this is another perfect example where you can utilize the fact that NetClose is embedded in with native NetSuite and take advantage of some of the things that already exist in the NetSuite system, like saved searches. So you can actually tap in saved searches to these various accounts that you're reconciling, and those saved searches can pull in the explained balances. So those can be utilized to kind of automatically reconcile and ensure that you have the appropriate balances for each of these accounts. So only when a discrepancy arises between the results from a saved search, which is explained, and the ending balance for the account, that's where you can go in and start digging into as to why that has occurred. And this is particularly helpful for companies that have, for example, private investors that require certain reconciliations to be done on key balance sheet accounts, or even for companies that are so large that they're public. In that case, you're required to have specific reconciliations done. So this is an example of a tool that for some companies is absolutely imperative that just does not exist in the normal NetSuite system. And moving on to our next topic, let's talk about amortizations and accruals, which are both things that are commonly done as a part of the month-end procedure. And let's start off with amortizations. If you're not already familiar, the point of an amortization is that is an intangible asset that you are trying to write off over the course of its useful life. So if we come over to, again, standard NetSuite functionality, when it comes to amortizations, you basically come over here to lists, down to accounting, and you've got these amortization templates that you can create. So let's open up an example of that. And it looks like we've got 2 templates already in the system. So let's go with this first one, annual prepaid insurance. If we open that up, we can see the kind of information you would input for an amortization template. So you come in here, you set the method. So for example, you're going to have it amortize the same amount every single period over the amortization timeline, which in this case, if we come over here, it looks like there's 12 months as part of this amortization template. And then the kind of key part of it is that you're going to specify the exact accounts that are going to be impacted as a part of the amortization. So pretty simple. You can come in here and create an amortization template very quickly. And what you do at that point is a new bill comes in, something that should be amortized. And let's open up an example of a bill here. We've got one right here. So let's say we're going to open that up in edit mode. When that bill comes in, you generate the record in NetSuite. You then attribute this amortization template onto that bill. So as we can see here, we come down on this particular bill. And in this case, we come down to the expenses, we've got a line item, and right here under amortization schedule. This is where that specific template, the annual prepaid insurance, has been linked into this bill so that it can generate that schedule of 12 explicit periods in which it's going to straight line do an amortization on. Now, once that's been set up, in other words, you've created the bill, it's been attributed to this particular amortization template, that's when in any subsequent period, you'd want to run the journal entries for that amortization. And to do that, we would come up here to transactions, down to financial, and you can see right here we have create amortization journal entries. So let's open that up. It brings us to this tool where we specify the particular period that we're in, and it would basically pull up everything that is relevant to amortize in that period, and you can run those journal entries all at the same time. So that's how you would handle it from a NetSuite standpoint. Let's take a look at it now from a NetClose standpoint and see a lot of the added features that come along with that. So we'll close these. I'll hit yes on that, close this as well, just to kind of bring our tabs down to 0. And now we can come over here to NetClose and down here to amortizations. So the first thing I want to point out is this create from transaction. So this is a feature that, again, you don't have with normal NetSuite. In NetSuite, I showed you, you have to go onto the record, you have to then tag it to a particular template. But what if you've got so many bills coming in? You want to be able to generate these amortizations in a much more efficient manner. Well, you come to this particular tool, you set the filters, so you specify maybe a particular account, and let's come down here and tie this into our prepaid expenses. And you can also specify other things like you only want to look for bills. That would be a common one. And I'm going to set this timeline to be a little bit broader just so we get more bills come in here. And so it suddenly generates for that particular account in whatever timeline you're specifying. More likely than not, you're going to specify for a particular period. It's going to generate all the bills in this case for that particular account. And so we can come in here, we can say, great, all of these should be generated as their own amortizations. We simply select that, we come up at the top, and we can create every single amortization. Now, maybe you have an instance where 2 or 3 bills are all really relevant to one amortization. So you want to join them all together. Well, you can do that. You can come up here, hit create single amortization, and generate just one amortization and schedule that's going to run through that entire process. And we've got lots of additional features that are included with this particular tool. But one thing I want to show in particular is up here on NetClose with amortizations. Unlike when you're dealing just with NetSuite, where you create the bill, you obviously link it into the template, and after that, you're literally just running the journal entry for any subsequent period. When it comes to NetClose, they actually break out the functionality into several steps. So first thing is the generation of the amortization itself. You then generate the schedules, then you commence them, and then you can actually process the entries. And they even have a tool, totally separate, looks very similar to this, where someone who is often going in and approving the journal entries that have been run for various amortizations can have his own page. So he logs in, he can see all their approvals that he needs to review and do them all at once. So by splitting these up into so many different steps, you can have a segmentation of duties where one particular accountant is responsible for generating the schedules. And then maybe a senior accountant can come in, look at those schedules, verify they're correct, and then actually commence them. Different person comes in, runs the journal entries as a part of their routine duties, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a major aspect of being able to really break things down and make sure that the responsible individuals are handling their duties specifically. The next thing I want to comment on is I want to open up a particular amortization. So we're going to come over here, and I recently had this record open, this NetClose amortization. So let's click on that. And on this record, we'll get a feel for some of the additional capabilities we have specifically for amortizations. So you can see on this record, if you were dealing with a normal amortization record in NetSuite, you really just have the capability of running the journal entries. That's all you can do. Obviously, you can delete the record if you want, but here we have several additional steps, such as modifying the amortization. This is particularly critical if you're several periods into the schedule and you realize that either something has changed, or maybe you need to modify. You actually thought it was a different amount from the beginning. This is where you can come in. You can make that change very, very rapidly. They also have what's called a time machine that allows you to literally act as if you're in an earlier period. You could roll back the entire amortization if you want, etc. This might all sound pretty minor, but if you've ever dealt with amortizations, and especially ones that change over time or any mistake is made on them, and you will know what an incredibly tedious process it is to make any kind of adjustment to an existing already running amortization. So this modify option is an absolute lifesaver. Write-off is another handy one. If you've gotten to the point where you realize we want to write off the amortization, nothing else needs to be done with it, we can come in here, or even transferring it. Let's say a particular amortization needs to move over to a different subsidiary, department, etc. You can easily do that right here. The last thing I want to point out here is on the bottom of this record, you'll notice on the right here, really what we're looking at here is the schedule. So this amortization's been going. So we can see the initial balance, we can see period by period each specific amortization, and they're basically done as journal entries. So you can see each individual journal entry that was created as this thing's been running. And this is really how it will look from a native NetSuite standpoint. Normal journal entries are created, but NetClose actually gives you an additional functionality. It's just a setting that you can easily turn on in the system configuration. And what it'll do is every time it runs a journal entry, instead of creating a generic journal entry, it'll actually create what's in reality a custom transaction that is kind of like a NetClose specific amortization journal entry. So that way, all of those amortization journals are not mixed in with every other JE that you have. They're kind of off on the side and allows you to have really simple reporting specifically for your amortization. So that is another very, very helpful yet simple tool that is added with NetClose. So that's amortizations. Now let's take a look at accruals from a NetSuite standpoint. And the basic concept of an accrual, if you're not already aware of it, is that we have some particular bill that we want to expense in the current month, but we've either not actually received the bill yet or we haven't paid it yet. So a perfect example of that would be, we know we're going to have a rent expense this month, but the bill for that's not going to arrive until next month. So even though we don't have the bill in hand, we certainly want to be able to expense it in the current period. So if you want to handle that from a NetSuite standpoint, really the only way you can do that is you come over here to transactions, down to financials, and you make a journal entry. It's as simple as that. You go in and you can also add a reversal date. So if it runs for, let's say, the 30th of the month for $500 for rent, and then the first of the following period, it then reverses to accommodate for the fact that the bill is going to come in for that rent expense. That will obviously be recorded, etc. So that is the simplicity of it from a NetSuite standard perspective. Now let's take a look at what you can do with accruals in NetClose. So coming over here, we're going to go NetClose Accruals. And the first thing I want to show you is down here under Create from Search. So this is just another example where you can utilize the information that already exists in NetSuite to facilitate these common procedures. So in here, let's change the period from December to, let's say, November, and we're going to do the accrual automation. Think about this like a save search. We're basically going to tie this into a save search that's going to pull up all pending approval bills. So if I select that, it's going to do, this is basically a save search of all bills that are in the system but not yet approved. So we can't, obviously record the GL impacts of these. It pulls up all those bills, very similar to what I showed you earlier with the amortizations. We select all this, and then coming up here, we can simply hit create multiple accruals, and it will generate all of those accruals all at the same time. And to be specific, when I say generate those accruals, unlike with native NetSuite, where there's no accrual record in the system, you're simply running journal entries kind of on a one-off basis for every specific accrual. If you want to keep track of your accruals, you have to handle that outside of the system in some sort of an Excel grid just to be able to keep track of, again, your rent, whatever it is that you're trying to handle from an accrual standpoint. In NetClose, they've generated their own record for accruals. So that's particularly helpful to really get that trail of what's happened with this record. You can see exactly when it came in, and especially you have the ability now to match that accrual record up with the bill that comes in. So let me show you that. If we come over to NetClose Accruals, we have this match accruals page. We'll come here, and what you can do here is really on the left here, these are all examples of accruals that have been generated. For example, on that page I just showed you. Let's take this one over here, this audit fees accrual. We click on that. So we made that accrual. We put it in for 5,000, although we weren't for sure what the ending amount would be for that. We still had that registered. And then the following period, over on the right here, this is where we can see all of the relevant transactions that could be matched up with that accrual. So if I scroll down in here, it looks like right here, let's say this 4,672, that is the bill that came in later that was representative of that accrual expense that we had. So we can come in and select this, and we can now, coming up here, I'm not going to walk through every field here, but the basic concept is we've matched these things up, and we can do a match and adjust, where it basically registers the fact that these two things are connected. And because there was a discrepancy, we originally thought it was 5,000, it ended up only being 4,672. It can run a journal entry to make that adjustment. So that's just another example of something that really all gets tied in with these custom records in NetClose that you simply cannot do in the native NetSuite system. Which really brings me to my next topic. We're going to close some tabs here just so we can free up space. The idea of Flux analyses. So a Flux analysis, if you're not already familiar with it, is a very, very helpful tool when doing a period close. And what it allows you to look at is for a particular account, you can see what was the current period and how does that compare to the previous period. That's the most common usage of it. You can actually compare whatever quarters you want. You can compare one period to the same period for the previous year. You can do whatever you want, but last period to the current period, that's probably the most common usage. And let's take a look at how that is. If we come over to NetClose, now the reason I'm not showing you a Flux analysis in NetSuite is because NetSuite doesn't come with Flux analyses. You simply don't have that capability. So this is an addition from a NetClose standpoint, something that, again, most companies, they handle it either in an Excel grid or some kind of external app to be able to do that comparison of how have things changed for this particular account from month to month. So let's open up our review Flux analyses. Opening this up, I'm going to set a particular scenario, which you can just think of that as a template. So we're going to set that template and we'll limit it down to one specific subsidiary, and it generates our Flux analysis right on the spot. So you can see on the left, we have the relevant accounts. So we can see our checking, our savings, etc. And more importantly, we can see the current period that we're dealing with, and then the previous period, how it's changed and the percentage of change. So this is a tool where you can go in and go, hey, there's a particular account here. There should be no change for this account. So why has it changed? We want an explanation of what's going on with that. Or maybe there's a particular account that has benefited. Maybe it's increased a lot, and we want to find out what's happening with that account. Why are we seeing such a positive change in here? We want an explanation of that. It might be something that we should strengthen from a management perspective. So this is, again, for a lot of businesses, just a critical tool from a managerial accounting standpoint. And again, simply not something available to you in the NetSuite system. So let's move on now to our final major topic, which is the reporting capabilities. So obviously NetSuite does have reporting capabilities. We can come up here to reports, down to financial. And we've got things like the income statement, we've got the balance sheet, the cash flow statement, and then things that are even more specific to the month-end close procedure, which is, for example, down here we have things like intercompany reconciliation, we've got amortization forecasts, waterfalls, but honestly, there's a pretty limited, it's a finite amount of reports that you have available to you relevant to the period close procedure, mainly because, as you probably figured out by now, there's not that many tools available to you in NetSuite to do the month-end close. You've got your tasks, which are incredibly rigid, non-customizable. You're locked off with that. You have your GL locking, which again is very limited. You have your bank reconciliation, but no additional recs. You have your amortizations, which you can do, and you can do accruals, but you have limited capabilities for both of those elements. No flux analysis. For every single one of these concepts, by limiting what we have in the native NetSuite system, we then don't have that many reports and saved searches that we can lean on to provide additional insight for these different capabilities. Obviously, I'm sure you've guessed this at this point, when we look at NetClose with all of its additional capabilities, it then adds so much opportunity to dive into detail when it comes to reporting. So let's take a look at that. First off, if I just click on this tab, it brings me to a dashboard specific for the month-end close. So this is utilizing all of these saved searches, tiles, portlets, lists, etc., to provide insights from some aspect of the month-end close, whether it's tasks specifically, reconciliations, amortizations, whatever you want. You can make custom dashboards for every particular type of role that's going to be involved in the month-end close, whether it's your auditors, your managing accountants, your specific task preparers, etc. You can get into as much detail and customization as you want. You can also come over here to NetClose down to reports. And if I click on this all reports, you're going to see, first off, this isn't even all the reports. There's actually a number of additional Suite Analytics workbooks that you can take advantage of. But these are some of the, I would say, critical reports that you can take advantage of. For example, a number of reports specifically relevant to reconciliations. Other ones would be things like my tasks due today. That's a perfect example of a specific list that you would want to add as a portlet on your dashboard if you know you have, let's say, 8 tasks as part of the month-end close procedure. Moving down from that, maybe more from a managerial standpoint, you have something like task dependency and status. So if I open that up, this is where you can see, and on the right here, we have our various filters. So I'm going to blank out the filters, and you can see on the left, every single one of these is basically its own task. And then in the middle, you can see what are these tasks dependent on. So this is where you can come in from an overview standpoint and say, wait a second, look, we've got all these tasks that haven't even started yet. What's happening with those? Well, they're all dependent on these ones, and maybe these ones all go through a particular reviewer and things are bottlenecking with that guy. We'd want to dive in and find out where are things getting held up? How can we unblock those so that we can get the tasks that we have to get done for this current period into motion? So let's now back out of this particular report. I'll hit back on that. And one additional report I wanted to point out specifically is this amortization waterfall that we have down here on the bottom. Amortization waterfall. Now this is actually a report that does technically exist in the native NetSuite system, but for anyone that's ever had to deal with this report, they know it is very finicky, it doesn't always provide the information you want, and you can kind of break it quite easily. As opposed to the report we have here, especially if I open up this timeline. So we're gonna kind of change the filters on that. We can open this up and very easily, I mean, I really just had to change one thing on the filters and I've got a fully broken down proper waterfall, which again, if you've ever dealt with the one in NetSuite, you know what I'm talking about. This is much easier to work with. You can export the information and you can gain the proper insights you need for your amortization process just going through this one report. So that's your overview look at the period close procedure in NetSuite, as well as how you can take advantage of the third-party embedded app NetClose to augment your month-end close procedures in NetSuite. So if you're interested in checking out NetClose, I will have a link for that down below and you can look into that, get a demo, etc. And with that in mind, if you found this particular video helpful, hit that like button, subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next video.